Hello and welcome to another video. Today's video I am going to be doing a book tag. It is the in and out book tag, in or out book tag. I'm not exactly sure what it's called. I was tagged by Nerdy Nat Reads, so thank you so much for the tag. I will have her video along with the original creator of this tag linked below. So let's just get right into it. Reading the last page first. Okay, I'm guilty of this. I used to do this when I was a kid just because I was very impatient when it came to reading, and it's not like I would read the whole first page, but I would flip to see exactly how many pages there were, and I would read like the last sentence, and it's like I couldn't help myself. I'm a little bit better about doing that now because it kind of does ruin things. Like, it's definitely spoilers and it definitely gives things away. If I am looking back to see how many pages there are, I'm very, very careful about not reading the last sentence anymore. So I'm gonna say out for this. Enemies to lovers. Yes, in. Enemies to lovers has such a different dynamic in a romance. Like, it makes it so interesting. And I kind of feel like in enemies to lovers, they're not really enemies from the beginning. Okay, so the way I see it is like this. People have very strong emotions towards other people and they can't exactly classify it yet, so they consider it enemies. Once those strong feelings are kind of figured out, that's when it kind of changes from enemies to lovers, and I love seeing how that happens in books. Like, I love it. So in. Dream sequences. I'm gonna say out for this one. I haven't actually seen it done well. A lot of dream sequences I have confused me, and I thought that they weren't actually dream sequences until like 6 pages later when she woke up, and it just kind of doesn't really fit a purpose to me. Unless the person is like a seer and gets predictions through their dreams, I feel like dream sequences don't belong in books. They're just confusing, honestly. Love triangles. I think I'm gonna say in for this one, with a caveat. A lot of times I see love triangles where there's this one guy who's like the main love interest, and then the other one is like a best friend and she never picks that one. I just don't like that specific love triangle trope because I feel like you know exactly what's gonna happen. But if it's a love interest where both interests are kind of like on equal footing, I'm interested in that. I like to see where that goes. Cracked spines. So I'm not exactly sure how to interpret this one because I don't purposefully crack my spines, but it's not the end of the world if spines are cracked. A ton of my books are secondhand with cracked spines, and like, it's not the end of the world. As long as pages aren't falling out, I don't really care. I don't really have strong enough of an opinion to say out with this one, but I also don't really have a strong enough of an opinion to say in. I'm kind of on middle ground here. Back to my small town. I don't know, take it or leave it with this one. I haven't really read too many books where there is a back to a small town, but when I do read them, I usually enjoy them. I don't know, I'm gonna say in. Monsters are regular people. I'm gonna say in with this one. The way I'm interpreting it is monsters are bad guys slash species that aren't humans. The way I'm kind of going with this is like, if there's a society, if there's a community, then they're people. I'm gonna say in. No paragraph breaks. Absolutely 100% out. I hate that. I hate it so much. No paragraph breaks is just straight walls of text, and I hate that. It's so like daunting. It's like hard for your eyes to comprehend that kind of thing. Yeah, no, out. Multi-generational sagas. So I've never actually read a book like this. Without kind of experiencing it, I want to say out because I don't really like books that take place over like years and years and years of time. I like books that take place in like a lot shorter periods of time, like maybe 1 year or less. I've read a couple books where like the whole book takes place in like 5 days. It's usually faster paced and it keeps my attention a little bit more. Also, it's easier for me to form attachments to the characters. But if there's like multi-generations, then there's like a lot of characters and I have a hard time following that kind of thought. So I don't know, I think if I was to read a multi-generational saga, I would need it to be pretty amazing for me to kind of change my mind on this. Rereading. Okay, so I don't reread a lot of my books, but the ones that I have reread, I've done multiple times. So I won't just like pick up a book and reread it one time and be like, yeah, that was good. I'm done with that now. No. If I pick up a book and reread it, I'm probably gonna read it like 5 times in like a 5-year span. So I'm gonna say in artificial intelligence. So I'm kind of not really the biggest fan of sci-fi books, specifically for androids and robots and cyborgs and AIs. It's not my thing. Like, I don't really think there's anything wrong with it. It's just not something I find interesting, so I'm gonna say out. Drop caps. Okay, so a drop cap is like this, where like the first letter is like really super big, and then all the other letters are like regular 12-point font, or this looks bigger than 12. 14 font. Whenever I think of drop cap, I think of that like one SpongeBob episode where he's trying to write an essay and he spends like all this time writing the with like a beautiful T, but like I think of that, I think it's so funny. I don't know, it's kind of hard to form an opinion on this when I haven't really thought about it too much, but I really like it. It's like one of those fancy formatting things that's just in books that I love. I don't know, and I like it. I think it's pretty. Happy endings. I'm gonna say something a little controversial here, and I'm gonna say out, but here's my reasoning. Probably 99% of the books I've read have had a happy ending if they're not a series. Like series, they kind of like don't exactly have happy endings because usually they have cliffhangers to get you to read the next book, and I don't see that as an ending. A lot of the books I've read have happy endings, and so I know what to expect when I get to the end of the book. If books had a mix-up of endings where like 50% of the time is happy and 50% of the time it was sad, I probably would have a preference to happy endings. But because that's not the case, I find these non-happy endings to be different and refreshing and interesting. So in that kind of case, I'm out with happy endings. Plot points that only converge at the end. I'm gonna say in with this one. Well, okay, no, it depends. I'm gonna say in if it's an interesting book and I'm flying through it, because then I can remember everything that's happening, and when it gets to the end where all of the storylines are pulling together and you have that aha moment, you can remember why you're having that aha moment. However, if it's like a boring book and it's dragging, I don't like it because by the time I get to the end, I have forgotten what some of the plot points are. And like, I don't really care too much about them coming together. So this is kind of one of those things where I like it when it's done correctly, but when it's not done correctly, I'm really annoyed by it. I don't know. Choosing in and out is a lot harder than I thought it was gonna be. Detailed magical systems. Out. 100% out. So I like to read fantasy, but I would still consider myself to be a newbie when it comes to reading fantasy. Mostly because fantasy books intimidate me. Like, they're big. Sorry if there's a bunch of noise. My neighbors have decided to have a whole little get together in the hallway. Anyways, so aside from the size, fantasy books usually just have so much going on and they're so dense. With the world building, with all the characters that are happening, usually multiple storylines. And then you add in a detailed magic system, like I'm lost. I'm completely lost. I'm not smart enough to read that kind of book. Like, I'm just not. I'm sorry. Classic fantasy races. So I'm gonna say in for this. Because I haven't read a ton of fantasy, having things that I'm familiar with kind of helped me get into the story a little bit better. Unreliable narrators. In. 100% in. I love unreliable narrators. I love reading books that are kind of like puzzles and you gotta figure out what's true and what's not. So if you want to read something kind of intellectual, I guess, Pale Fire by Vladimir Nabokov is a really, really great example of an unreliable narrator. So the way this book works is the first 70 pages of it is a poem, and then the rest of the book is footnotes and commentary, I guess, for the poem, kind of like explaining the lines. But it really has nothing to do with the poem itself. It's like this guy's telling the story about his life, and as you're putting the pieces together, you're kind of like, something is not right here. This is such a great book. It's definitely a thinker. You definitely have to use your brain for this one, but like, it's so interesting and it's such a great great unreliable narrator. I'm trying to think about other unreliable narrators. Maybe American Psycho's an unreliable narrator. Anyways, I love unreliable narrators so much because I'm very interested in the way that minds work. I don't want to be that person that brings up my degrees in like literally every video that I film, but I have a degree in English and psychology. And the reason why I did that was because I wanted to be able to understand the characters I was reading about, as well as one day eventually write my own book and write realistic, believable characters. I'm just very interested in the way the mind works. So reading unreliable narrators, it's just so interesting to me. So definitely in. Actually, if you have any other unreliable narrators that you really loved, like, let me know in the comments, because I would love to fill up a whole shelf with unreliable narrators. I love it so much. Evil protagonists. You know, I don't think I've ever read a book with an evil protagonist. Oh, I literally just showed you American Psycho. He's an evil protagonist, 100% for sure. It's different, you know? You're not reading a like a typical story where like the main character is good and they do everything they can to be good, and then something bad happens to them and they have to use their morals to do, like, that gets boring. Evil protagonists are very interesting. That's another one of those things, like, if you have recommendations for evil protagonists, let me know. So I'm gonna say in. The Chosen One. This is one of those things where I want to say out because it's so overdone and I'm bored of it and I'm tired of it. I feel like so many books right now have Chosen One qualities of it, especially if you're reading something paranormal or something fantasy. So if I decide to be out on Chosen Ones, I feel like it really limits the options of books I have left. Because even if they're not Chosen One in the Harry Potter vibes, they're still kind of Chosen One in like romances and stuff. Even if it's not like a whole prophecy, they're a chosen one. Like, usually a lot of the time in romances, people kind of have that almost like love at first sight thing, and I feel like that's very similar to a chosen one, because you see them and you're like, that's it, that's who I'm going to revolve my life around. Does that make any sense? Am I completely misunderstanding these tropes? I don't know. I feel like I haven't actually answered the question for this. I'm gonna say in, purely for the purpose that I feel like I don't really have a choice if I want to continue reading books. When the protagonist dies. Out. I feel like when a protagonist dies, that's a bold move on the author, but I don't like it. What I'm gonna say next could be kind of spoilery, so skip ahead a little bit if you like don't want to hear this. But a great example of the protagonist dies is the Divergent series, and I hated that so much. Divergent is probably one of my favorite books, like, ever. I've read that book probably the most of all the books I've reread. But as you get further into the series, the books go downhill, and I'm gonna stand by that opinion. I did not like book 3 at all. I read all the way up to the point where Triss dies, and I stopped reading. I'm done, I'm over it. No thanks. Really long chapters. Out, no, I don't got time for this, like, I don't. With this kind of like attention span that I have, I can't sit here and read 30-page long chapters, like, I can't. On the flip side of this, I also don't love really short chapters. James Patterson is like a really bad culprit with this, where his chapters will be like literally 3 pages long. I don't love that, especially when chapters are like 1 page long, because here's the thing. I'm one of those people who will like stop reading at chapter breaks sometimes, and sometimes I'll stop reading like halfway through a chapter and I'll stop at like a page break, or like one of those I don't know what those are called, but like the spaces between paragraphs where they're like, all right, this is a break. And for really short chapters, I start to feel guilty. Like, I'll set aside like some time to read, and then I'll be like, oh, okay, I'll just read one more chapter. And then it's like 1 page, and I'm like, oh, well, I gotta read another chapter. And then like 15 minutes later, I've read 15 chapters, and I just feel like I did a lot, and like that set amount of time I had aside for reading, I expanded that even though I didn't. I don't know, it's definitely mind games I play with myself, but I don't like long chapters and I don't like short chapters. I like that middle ground of like 10-15 pages for a chapter. French flaps. I looked through my books to see if I had any of these, and I actually don't. So French flaps are, I'll just use this for an example. French flaps are this piece in paperbacks. I'm not really a fan of these. I'm gonna say out because I feel like it makes the book bulky, and then I feel like I have to use that for a bookmark, and then it just like looks really weird when I'm like folding it weird because it's now doesn't really reach halfway through the book, but I'm trying to force it. I don't know, I kind of just, I don't like it. Deckled Edges. I definitely have a book with deckled edges and I lost it. Wait. Okay, here we go. We got us our French flaps and deckled edges. So deckled edges are this like uneven ending of the papers. Another really good example of deckled edges is the Lemony Snicket books, Series of Unfortunate Events. I'm pretty sure all of those books have deckled edges. I like it. I like the way it feels. I feel like books with deckled edges, you kind of remember them. I don't know, is that a little weird? Yeah, I'm gonna say in for this. I like it. I think it's cool. Signed copies by the author. In, 100% in. I don't know a type of person that would say out to this. So this is my copy of Aragon. I got it at Barnes & Noble's, and I was so happy to see that it was signed. So this book, The Starboard Sea, I actually had to read this book for school, and then the author came to the school and she like did a reading and a Q&A and stuff, and we actually got to get in line and have her sign the books. I was so happy. Like, that was so cool. That was such like an experience to go somewhere and have an author sign their work, like something that you really enjoyed. It's just like you saying like, yes, I love this, give me more of you. Put more of you in my book, because I loved it. Dog earring pages. I'm gonna say out with this one. I don't really like it. So I'm thinking back to Cracked Spines and how I don't really have that much of an opinion on it. But dog-eared pages is different because they're like something you can physically see as you're reading the book. Like, if I get a book secondhand and there's pages that have been dog-eared and then were folded back up, like, I'm not gonna throw the whole book away and get a new one, but I'm not gonna do it myself. I try to keep as much integrity in books as I can because I know that books go through a lot, especially if they're secondhand and especially if they're going from reader to reader to reader. Like, I plan on keeping these books for like a really long time and maybe having my future children read some of them. So like, I want them to last through all of the time and all of the readers. I'm also kind of convinced that one day we're gonna live in a society like 451 where all of books are gonna be burned and banned and stuff. And like, I wanna keep my collection as good as I can. And the last one is chapter titles instead of numbers. I'm gonna say out. I'm gonna say out. I like chapter titles. I think they're very interesting and they're a good way to kind of preview the chapter, and it's also one of those things where if you reread it, you're kind of like, oh yeah, that's what this chapter is about. But I don't like that instead of numbers. I'm very like number oriented, and that's why I go back and see how many pages are in a book, and I like to know how many pages I have left. I like to know how many chapters there are. I like to know which chapter I'm on. I like to know my progress through the book, like percentage wise. And when chapters don't have numbers, I feel kind of lost in space. Like, I need something to kind of ground me down, and page numbers aren't enough. Like, I can look and see, okay, I'm on page 100 out of 250% of the way through. But if I'm on chapter 20 out of 40 chapters, I feel a whole lot more accomplished. I don't know, it's one of those things where I just need it for my sanity. Okay, so that is all of the topics for this book tag. It was like a whole lot of fun to do. I haven't actually tagged anybody in videos before, but because I was tagged, I feel like I should, because it's like such like a fun feeling to be tagged. So these ladies that I'm tagging, I've seen them do book tag videos before, so if they want to do another one, that's great, but like, honestly, no pressure. You don't have to do it if you don't want to. So I'm gonna be tagging Sarah from The Book Bag and Autumn from Autumn's Boutique. I will link their channels below, so go check them out. I really love their videos. But yeah, so thank you so much for watching. I had a fun time. Love talking about books in any shape or form. So yeah, I'll see you next time. Bye.